Hello and welcome back. Today we are going to be continuing our lecture on the 1920s. Very specifically, we're going to be talking about the different types of conflict that are going on in American society. The first type of conflict is the conflict between the urban parts of America and the rural parts of America. Urban just means cities, and rural just means countryside. Up until this point in our history, we have been a rural agrarian society, mostly farmers, mostly living out in the countryside. But in the 1920s, actually, it's the 1920 census. For the first time ever, the majority of people are actually living in cities. 51.2% of the population live in cities. And so, we know that people living in cities have, a different lifestyle and different priorities than people living in the countryside. They tend to be a little bit more modern. They tend to, be a little bit more accepting and accommodating, whereas people in the countryside tend to be a little bit more religious, a little bit more conservative when it comes to change. Or anything kind of new, and so that's going to cause some problems. What ends up really happening is a lot of these young men that fought during World War I are really going to experience life in Europe, right? They were living on these small farms. They went to Paris, they went to Europe to fight. When they got time off or leave, they'd head to Paris and they saw all the things that a big city had to offer. And, Paris in particular was, known for its nightlife, its women, its music, the drinking. And so, these young men, when they come back, they've just kind of outgrown the farm life. Arthur Fields writes a song about it. One of the lyrics is, how are you going to keep them down on the farm after they've seen Paris? And it's talking about the plight of mom and dad trying to keep their kid on the farm because they're afraid that the big cities are just this cesspool of sin and violence and sex. And so what we see is those returning vets, they don't care. They had fun. They saw what casual dating in cities is like that would be totally unacceptable down on the farm. They got used to having a drink and going out dancing and doing those types of things, gambling, and they experience that in Europe, and they want to experience it at home too. And you're not going to get that in the 1920s living in some small town. You're going to have to go to the cities to do that. The big city, it required a change in thinking for a lot of these young men and young women. From a more real kind of religious mindset to a mindset that requires a little bit more scientific inquiry. Which is not we don't really have that distinction today. I think probably the countryside was probably a little bit more religious than the cities, but I would imagine it's negligible. Most of us believe in embracing science, but in the 1920s there was the kind of this stark difference. People in the cities tended to embrace new scientific concepts and ideas, which isn't always a good thing, by the way, right? Science is constantly changing, and in the 1920s, one of the things that science believed in was social Darwinism, which the idea of survival of the fittest applied to human beings. That gets real dangerous because then all of a sudden you start to get into racial hierarchies, right? Like, well, which race is on top? Which race is being more successful? Maybe it's because they're just genetically better, and then oops, oh, there you go. Now you got Hitler, right? So for the most part, this idea of embracing scientific inquiry is good when you're talking about embracing the scientific method and theories and experiments and scientific methodology. But sometimes it can be sketchy, and this will prove to be sketchy. I think social Darwinism is a great example. That's why it's always a good idea to embrace science, but also to question what science is telling us. And anybody who tells you that that's unscientific is wrong. That's what you're supposed to do with science. You just question things over and over and over again until you can't do it anymore. And cities will tend to do that. They also tended to tolerate gambling and drinking more, even though we're living in prohibition right now in the 1920s, at least in the beginning. Oh, yeah, all the 1920s. You're going to see that it's going to be speakeasies, and it's going to be tolerated within the cities more than in the countryside, which is interesting because a lot of the distilleries are going to be out in the countryside. But the jazz clubs and stuff are going to be tolerated in the city, and that's another big deal too. Jazz, that's one of the very few purely American musical traditions, right? Jazz and the blues, and those are African American inventions and contributions to American society. And so you're going to have white people listening to black music in the 1920s in the cities, and that's going to be super controversial. And the idea of casual dating, right? If you're living out on the farm, a lot of times there's a limited pool of people to select from when choosing a mate. That you're one, there's fewer people, and two, you're related to half of them. And so dating was really kind of courting. You were going, once you started the process, it was kind of expected that you were going to end up with the person you started that process with. Where in the cities, it's more, this idea that I'm going to marry not out of necessity, but out of love. And so I need to kind of like figure out what it is I want. I'm going to date around, and just because I'm with you now doesn't mean I'm going to end up with you later. Mom and dad down on the farm are going to have problems with that. They're going to view that as promiscuous, as being a sin, and are going to struggle with that. All right. So this political cartoon right here is an example of what of somebody in a rural area would think of a city. Right? You've got this snake coming out of the hole in the ground, which is right in the middle of a city, in the heart of a city. Snakes are, biblically associated with sin, and so you've got the underworld is in the heart of a city, and the snakes are just pouring out of it, and each snake represents a different sin, like graft or corruption, dope, racketeering, gambling, murder, blackmail, vice, bootlegging, corruption. And so this is, kind of the fear that the average rural person has about the cities. And the reality is, you stack people on top of each other, you're going to see increases in crime and things of that nature. But, living in a city versus living in the countryside, one's not any more moral than the other. It's just, sometimes some people are just as moral as their opportunities, and you have more opportunities to be immoral in the city. And so I think that's what parents are afraid of. Raise your kid right, and it shouldn't matter. So we also see a difference is something that's similar to what we're talking about, which is the idea between modern and old-fashioned values, right? And so, what we're seeing is America is just modernizing, not just in values, but in everything. We're at the point now where America, although is relatively, we're a large country, but a relatively small percentage of the total population controls about 40% of the world's wealth. That's really significant. And again, is another example of how capitalism has really helped the United States. That number will increase during World War II. So we're not at the zenith yet. We're seeing that we're moving away from the old-fashioned horse and buggy, moving towards the automobile. The Henry Ford's going to help us with that. He's going to make the automobile obtainable for the average American family, which will dramatically change America. Just think about that. All of a sudden now, if before the automobile, if you lived in Freeburg, going to St. Louis, you probably would never in your life go from Freeburg, Illinois to St. Louis, Missouri. And, that just it was too far away to do that by walking or on a horse. Maybe if you had some sort of business or some very, very important reason, you would do that. Today, what's it take? 45 minutes? No big deal. People do it all the time, multiple times a day sometimes. Um, Belleville, Illinois to St. Louis, Missouri. I've done that 3 times in a day before. Don't ask why. I'm bad with organizing my life, I guess. But the automobile makes all that possible. We're going to see the increase in the number of paved roads, the very famous Route 66 that will take us across the country. We're going to connect the country from Chicago to California. What that's going to do is it's really going to connect us and make us, much more assimilated, much more similar across the country. Later, it's going to, spring up all new industries, motel industries, hotel industries that didn't exist before, malls. Eventually, once we get the highway system in the 1950s, we're going to start to see fast food, the trucking industry. It's going to make commerce much easier, travel much easier, and it's just going to make us, much more similar and much more connected. And it's going to be a unifying force in the United States. It liberates these small towns. All of a sudden now it's much more likely that if you live in a small town that you're going to be able to expose to all the positive things of a city. I love living next to a city but not in a city. Why? Because I want all the benefits of a city. I want the restaurants. I want the shopping. I want the sports. I want the museums and the libraries and the universities. But I don't want the negatives of a city, which are the crime and the pollution and the graffiti and all just the noise. Oh my Lord, my sister lives in New York City, and when I go visit her, the noise never stops. And so roads are going to allow people to have the benefits of a city and still live in a small town and have the benefits of a quiet neighborhood without much crime. It's a real game changer. We'll see that with the automobile, we'll start to see an increase in what is known as urban sprawl. Urban sprawl means a city used to have to be this size, real small, right? Because all the people, why do people live in cities? Well, because there's jobs there. Well, pre-automobile, you had to live within walking distance of your city. So you all had to live in this tiny little cluster right here, right? But as people start to be able to afford automobiles, all of a sudden you don't have to live within walking distance of your city or of your job. I'm sorry, not your city. You don't have to live within walking distance of your job. You have to live within driving distance of your job. So all of a sudden cities start to spread out and expand and expand and expand and expand, and they get bigger. That's what urban sprawl is. Cities just spread out because you don't have to live right next to where you work. Once we invent the highway system in the 1950s, we don't invent it. The Germans really do, but we steal it, and then we'll really see the growth of cities and then the growth of suburbs, which all of you listening to this live in. And the automobile becomes a status symbol, just like it is today too. It's why do people buy BMWs and not Honda Civics? They're, for the most part, there's not much of a difference, right? Yeah, the leather might be a little bit nicer. It might go a little bit faster, but you're not allowed to go that fast anyway. Why do why do some people my age drive around in BMWs? It's to show off to people that they can afford them. It's the classic flaw of the middle class. So we spend way too much money on cars to try and impress people that we don't really like anyway. And so that really starts in the 1920s, right? If you could show you had a car, then everybody knew that you had made it, you had arrived. Same kind of thing now. The second you can buy that BMW or that Corvette or whatever it is. Land Rover, you've kind of shown everybody that you have arrived. Unfortunately, in the 1920s, just like today, people buy cars they can't afford and it does more damage than good, but what are you going to do? The next, big modern advancement is going to be in electrical appliances. Wow, Mr. Garrison, electrical appliances. What are you talking about? Well, I'm talking about irons, to iron your clothes, and toasters and washing machines and vacuums, sewing machines. Um, all things that I'm sure you're thinking like, wow, Mr. Garrison, that's super boring. Um, well, maybe. Uh, but I would argue is incredibly important, more important than automobiles. Now you're thinking, well, how is a toaster and a washing machine more important than an automobile? Well, for this one reason, who's at home doing all the cooking and cleaning? Right, because of the cult of domesticity, and just the history of work. It's women that are at home, and before these appliances, how long did it take to cook your food and do the laundry and clean the house? It took all day, every day. That's part of the reason why historically we divided labor. There's a long history behind that. And we've kind of talked about it in bits and pieces. But before we had ovens and eventually microwaves in the 1950s, we before we had washing machines and irons, it literally took all day to cook your food. It literally took all day to do the laundry. So somebody had to go out and make money, and somebody had to stay at home and do those chores. And so, and it ultimately ended up being women. A part of that also was because women, were raising kids. And so, because women can biologically feed babies and men can't, is one of many reasons why men went out and, farmed while women stayed in, took care of the kids and took care of all these other things. And so that division of labor did make sense, up until the 1920s and really the 1950s. It's these inventions, these electrical appliances, that are going to change that, right? Because all of a sudden in the 1920s, it doesn't take all day to do your laundry. Right before, if you had to like heat up a wash tub and get that little washboard, if you ever seen washboard abs, like those washboards, it's like a little tin thing and it's like serrated, and you just took your shirt and you got some heated water and put some soap in there, and just each shirt you would just do this and scrape it up and down on that tin washboard, and then you would rinse it out, and then you'd hang it out, and it would dry by the power of the sun, which took forever. I mean, think how long it took to do laundry, forever, and it never stopped. And so women were just doing that all day. Now you got a washing machine, you throw it in the washing machine. We don't have dryers yet, but hang it out and it dries. So you don't really have to do anything while it's drying. All of a sudden now women have time. And that is super important, right? Because they have time, they've got to fill that time with something. You know what they're going to do? They're going to get a job. They're going to pursue their interests. They're going to get an education, right? And all of a sudden, somebody doesn't have to be at home all the time to make sure those things get done, right? And that's going to be a huge step. The next big step that women are going to need is going to happen, because of industrialization. Strength becomes less important, once we get to like World War II, and they can start to do some of those jobs that they physically couldn't do in the 1700s and before. And then all of a sudden, you're going to start to see the playing field really start to level. There's a lot of people that want to tell you that, like, oh, like, men have repressed women and, kept them at home. And I'm not going to say that there wasn't some of that. I'm certain there was. But the majority of the reason for women having to be at home was because, they had to take care of the babies because they were the only ones that could feed them. And they weren't strong enough to, plow a field on their own pre-industrialization. Technology changes that. And so what we're going to see is, once those changes has happened, it's going to slowly start to change the way that we view gender roles in the workplace. And so that really starts in the 1920s. It's going to be, we're going to see big change in the 1940s and then dramatic change by the 1970s. And society is going to be slow to keep up. There's no doubt about it. And that's when we start to have like discrimination issues and things like that. Not that there wasn't that stuff before, but that wasn't the primary reason before. So This is going to be very, very freeing for women. All right. One of the other big changes between like kind of the old fashioned way of life and modernity is going to be this, conflict between science and religion, right? The kind of old fashioned view was that, uh, religion took priority over science. The kind of major belief is this belief in fundamentalism, right? The strict literal interpretation of the Bible. Even religious people today, there's very few that are actually fundamentalists that believe the world was created in 7 days by God. That the young Earth kind of philosophy that doesn't account for dinosaurs, right? And so the most religious people don't have this literal interpretation of the Bible. But in the 1920s, a lot of people did, and that's going to come into direct conflict with different science, particularly evolution. So fundamentalists are mostly Protestant, mostly rural in the 1920s. They're the people that believe that the cities were filled with sin, right? Gambling, drinking, casual dating. We talked about that a little bit earlier. All right. And they tend to be anti-evolution. They believe that the biblical story of Adam and Eve is literally true, and will discount the evidence that people have evolved over time. And so the fundamentalists are not going to want to have evolution taught in school, and the people that are embracing more scientific inquiry are going to be promoting evolution, and that will eventually lead us to the Scopes monkey trial, the Scopes trial. We're going to talk about the Scopes trial in a separate lecture. We're going to give that its whole lecture, just to cover it very quickly. A teacher in Tennessee is going to teach a lesson on evolution, and he is going to be fined, and it will eventually make its way to court. And to be the fundamentalists will win that actual court case. And so most people think, because evolution is taught in schools today, that the evolutionists win. They actually lose. It's society that will eventually change, allowing for evolution to be taught in schools. If you're interested in that, there'll be another lecture covering that in detail later. All right. In the 1920s, we're also going to see the competition between two different economic systems, really kind of for the first time. The first system that we're going to talk about that's in conflict is capitalism. Capitalism, the technical definition, is a system in which private individuals can make economic decisions. Those decisions: what are they going to buy, what are they going to sell, how much are they going to sell it for, what are they going to make, how much of it they're going to make. All of that, it boils down to you get to choose, right? And so there's some good things about that, and there's some bad things about that. In a capitalist system, you have freedom, and that's awesome, right? If you want to be a ballerina, you can be a ballerina if you want. If you want to be a toilet paper manufacturer, you can be a toilet paper manufacturer. And nobody cares why you pick it. You just get to pick it. So why might somebody choose to be a ballerina? Well, because they love dancing. Right? That's, my sister is a ballerina. Why'd she choose to be a ballerina? Well, it wasn't to make money, right? She did it because she loves it and she's happy and she does okay, but, she's never going to be rich. And she had to make sacrifices for years and years and years. And for a long time had to live poor as a struggling dancer. She made it now and does okay. But, still doesn't make a lot of money, right? Why would somebody ever decide to be a toilet paper manufacturer? Well, nobody loves the idea of making toilet paper, right? Like, that's not a thing people are passionate about. Why would somebody want to make toilet paper? Because everybody poops. There's a market for it. and you're gonna make money, right? Hey, COVID lockdowns, what did everybody go out to buy right away? Toilet paper, right? And so people choose that. They might be miserable making toilet paper, right? Who has fun making toilet paper? My sister has fun being a ballerina, right? But nobody has fun making toilet paper. So why would somebody choose it? To make money. And you're free to make those choices. And that's awesome because you can decide, what do I want to do? I want to make money, or maybe I want to follow my passion and not make money, but that's okay because I'm following my passion and I'm happy. Or maybe I just want to be lazy. I don't really want to follow my passion or make money. I'm just going to sit back and chill and kind of hope things work out. Good luck to you, but you have that choice. Now, that's the plus. What's the downside? Capitalism, there's winners and losers, right? And so, the toilet paper manufacturers making a killing, right? The ballerina, it's not making money, but that's fine because they're following their passion. And then the guy that didn't really want to do anything, he's going to be poor. And so, that's a downside. There's an unequal distribution of wealth. Now, you have rich people and you have poor people. Now, the plus side of capitalism is that it benefits rich people and the manufacturers, it benefits them to make good products for as little money as possible. They want to make their products cheap because the cheaper they make it, the more that they can sell, right? Because somebody else is probably going to try and undercut them. And because of that, prices drop, which means even those of us like me that are never going to make a killing, never going to be rich, we can live a very comfortable life because those, rich business owners are making things so inexpensive that I can afford to buy them. And so what we know with capitalism, even though it's not perfect because, there's people that do really well and there's people who don't, we in capitalist societies have a higher standard of living than everybody else. Yes, we have poor people, but we have so much cheap goods that those poor people can buy more in a capitalist system than they can in other systems, right? So we see it all the time, right? We have people in America that we consider poor that have a roof over their head, they've got clothes and food and probably a smartphone, and we still consider them to be impoverished. But then you look in places like Africa and Asia where people that they consider to be poor don't have running water, don't have indoor plumbing, and are starving. Now, do we have some people like that in America? Yes, but it's a very small percentage. And I'm not implying that we shouldn't do what we can to help those people. We definitely have to because it's one of the flaws of capitalism. But we do have, the richest population with the highest standard of living in the entire world. So, what's the second economic system? Well, that's communism. And we can call it communism / socialism. They're very related. They're not the same, but they're very, very close. And what's that? Well, that's a system where the economic in the communist system and political systems that are based on one-party government and state ownership of property and state ownership of economic choices. So, communism, the government owns everything and they distribute it out to people. In socialism, the government doesn't own the property, but it sets prices and wages and tells which people will work in certain jobs. Well, why would you want that? Well, you don't have the economic freedom anymore, right? You don't get to choose. The government in socialism and communism chooses for you. So if you want to be a ballerina, well, does the government really care if there's a lot of ballerinas in America? Do they really care if you want to be a ballerina? No. What do they care about? Well, they care about the big stuff: farming, manufacturing, right? Maybe they care about toilet paper manufacturing, although the Soviet Union didn't. They never had enough of it. And so, the person that wants to be a ballerina, well, you can't be a ballerina, right? You're going to have to be a shoemaker, right? But on so you pretty much get rid of the economic choice. But on the plus side, right, the idea is that they do that because they want to make sure that everybody's making the same amount of money. So right, so they tell you what you're going to do, and they set the wages to try and make sure that everybody makes the same amount of money. Now that's great theoretically; it's never worked, right? Because, and we've talked about this with like utopian societies before. If the government comes in and says you have to be a shoemaker and you don't want to be a shoemaker, how hard are you going to work? I'll still probably work hard. I'm that kind of person, right? But a lot of people said, I'm not going to work hard at all. Now, even a guy like me that generally wants to work hard, why do I work hard? Well, I work hard so I can get a raise. Well, in a communist or in a capitalist system, if the business owner who wants to make a product and sell it wants to have the best product possible, he wants the best workers, so he pays them, right? And so good workers can go to their boss and say, "Hey, look, I work twice as hard as Joe. I'm here twice as long, and I make 4 times as many products as he does. I need you to give me a raise, or I'm going to quit." What's the capitalist guy say? Excellent. I'll give you a raise. Good job. And so it benefits me to work hard, to make better products, and to continue to make stuff so people can buy. Well, in a communist system, the government sets the prices and they set the wages. And they do that to make sure everybody's equal. So now if me and Joe are working in the shoe factory, do I get any benefit by working harder than Joe? No. Do I get any benefit for working hard at all? No, right? I get paid the same no matter what. So you know how hard I'm going to work? Even me, who's motivated to work hard, I'm not working hard at all. I'm going to do just enough, right, to make sure I don't get fired, right? And so, because there's no benefit to working hard. Well, communist countries all around the world, communist and socialist countries all around the world are going to figure that out. They're going to recognize like, oh crap, we're trying to make sure everybody gets paid the same, right? But we still got to have people making shoes and toilet paper and all that kind of stuff. And the people just won't work hard because there's no benefit for them. And so what they figure out is, well, and this is why communist and socialist countries have killed over 100 million people, 100 million people since the 1920s, right? That's a crazy amount, because what they figured out was, well, if we can't motivate them to work by paying them more, guess what we can motivate them with? Jail. And essentially slavery. And that's what the communist countries will end up doing. They'll start rounding up people, throwing them in prison, and then using them as slave labor. So you have this system that seems like this great system that's going to try and make everybody equal. So we don't have rich, we don't have poor, and we can all live in harmony. But it falls apart because that's not the way that humans work, right? We want to work hard to make our lives better, which means some of us will and some of us won't, and there's going to be winners and losers, right? And so when the communists start to see that happening, they start to use threats of imprisonment and death to keep the system going. And so those are the two systems that are happening in the 1920s. Now, why would anybody choose communism? Well, it's because it doesn't necessarily come from an evil place, although there are evil communists. It's because they really truly believe that they want people to be equal, right? And everybody have the same kind of thing. And so we constantly have people trying to push us in that direction. The problem is it's never worked. There's just never an example of a communist or a truly socialist government that has ever worked out. And they don't know that in the 1920s. All right, so that's going to lead into our next big conflict, which is the conflict between labor or workers and management, the bosses. We're going to go through this really quick because I kind of covered it earlier in a previous lecture. During World War I, the labor wasn't allowed to strike. We continually had to make bullets and guns to win the war, and so workers were told, do your patriotic duty. You're not allowed to strike. You can't get a raise. Well, for 3 years, the workers essentially said, fine. But when the war was over, they were like, we need our raise now. We did our part, and they're going to ask for more money, which is totally justifiable. But remember, those businesses, they're making less money now because the war's over. They bought all this new equipment. They bought, new land and new factories. They're in debt, and they don't know how bad the economy is going to be moving forward. It's going to be very bad, Great Depression bad, and they feel like we don't have the money to pay you. So it's not entirely the management's fault either. And they're like, we can't afford to give you a raise. Well, guess what those workers are going to do? Now that they can strike, they're going to start to strike, and justifiably so. And so in 1919, we're going to see, over 3,000 strikes. Some of these employers, to keep their business afloat, wanted their workers to keep those low wages and work long hours. And, they would, some of them solely from greed, right? But most of them because that's what they thought they had to do to keep their business afloat. And the workers just didn't like it. The employers, the management, were able to sway public opinion onto their side by claiming that the strikers and the unions are all infiltrated by communists, and the average American believed it. They're not. At this point in history, all the way through the 1950s, only about 1% of the American population is actually communist. So there's no real threat there. The problem is the communists in the Soviet Union and in Eastern Europe through the Comintern, the Communist International, they're telling people that they're going to infiltrate capitalist countries through the unions and overthrow the governments. And so the American people took that threat serious. The employers, the management were saying that was what's happening. And so we'll see a rise in anti-union sentiment. Union membership will drop, and that all has to do with the Red Scare, or the fear of communists. We've mentioned the Red Scare before. We're going to do a whole lecture on it later, so we're just going to leave it at that for now. All right. Next big conflict is going to be over prohibition. And it's going to be between what they refer to as the wets and the dries. The wets are people who wanted to continue drinking, and the dries are people who supported prohibition. Remember, early on, it was like the women's movement supported the temperance movement and prohibition. They believed men were, getting drunk, losing their jobs, spending all their money at the bar. Alcohol was the root of all evil, and caused domestic violence. And because of that, prohibition got passed. And the wets, mostly people living in cities, immigrants, they're going to say that's crazy, right? There's nothing wrong with me having a drink every once in a while. If some people take it overboard, that's their problem, but I should still be able to have my drink. And so this becomes a major issue. The 18th Amendment, or Prohibition, was passed in finalized in 1919, and what it did was outlawed the sale and manufacture of alcohol. Most of the supporters were, rural, were from the South, were religious. A lot of women were supporters of prohibition. Remember, before the 1920s, women generally weren't allowed in saloons. They weren't allowed to drink. Well, some women did, upper class women. Right, but drinking was mostly a male thing. Right, city dwellers and immigrants didn't support it. Right, the Irish and German immigrants in particular just lived in a beer culture where they thought, it's no big deal if I have, a few beers every night, whatever. And so they really came into conflict. We'll see, because there's a market for drinking, that drinking never really goes away. There's this kind of myth that drinking actually increases during Prohibition, but that's not true. Drinking does go down. The average American's like, well, I'd like to have a beer, but if it's illegal, I'm not going to risk it, and they don't drink. But that being said, significant portions of people still want to drink. And so a whole market will, form to get people alcohol. So we'll see speakeasies, which are hidden saloons, pop up all over cities. They might be in the back of a shop or office building. You do a little secret knock and they let you in. And serve alcohol, and these speakeasies, because it's illegal to have alcohol, they really become like the Wild West, where there's no rules, gambling, prostitution, whatever. A lot of the bigger ones are going to be run by the mafia. right? And the mafia was really, before prohibition, was really a small time deal, right? Like, didn't make a lot of money, ran gambling rings and prostitution rings, but there wasn't a lot of money in being a mafioso. But during prohibition, fortunes were being made selling alcohol, and so the mafia really takes advantage of that and is going to grow exponentially. And that's why we see, although people believed that alcohol was the root of all evil and all crime, when we get rid of alcohol, make it illegal, we're actually going to see crime go up, because we're empowering the mafia. And these bootleggers, people who sell alcohol, right? In the beginning of prohibition, it was just like kind of your average guy making, bathtub gin. That was the bootlegger selling alcohol. But eventually, like I said, the mafia will take over, and they're going to organize an entire industry around alcohol. It's very similar to marijuana today, right? There's no doubt about it. There's a demand for marijuana in America today, and in most places, although it's changing, Illinois, it's legal now for adults. But most places it's illegal. Well, if people want it and it's illegal, where do you have to get it? Well, you have to get it from criminals. And so if there's a demand for a thing that criminals are willing to supply people with, you're empowering criminals, right? You're giving them a market to make money. And so, if you're smoking marijuana in a state in the United States today in 2020 or beyond, where it's illegal, you're funding cartels, right? And so, there are people out there that think they're good people that say, I just want to, smoke marijuana. There's nothing wrong with it. But, they're buying it from a guy who bought it from a guy who bought it from a cartel that also traffics in the selling of, children in the sex trade. And so, you're empowering those people with your money. And that's that's a real problem. And it's the same thing that happens during prohibition. There's like your average Joe who's just, a teacher or a, orthodontist that says, hey, I used to be able to have a drink. I'm going to still have a drink every once in a while. I'm not hurting anybody. And they go out and they buy it from their bootlegger. And that bootlegger makes a little bit of money off it. So he's going to continue to sell it, but he's got to buy his alcohol from somebody, and he's buying it from the mafia. That's making the mafia more money. The mafia also traffics in prostitution. They get into turf wars over, which bootleggers are going to be able to sell the alcohol to. People end up getting murdered, all because they want to sell that one guy that thinks he's not hurting anybody by buying a drink. And so, it's this real serious problem, and it's the law of unintended consequences. You got to really think these choices through. So, where did the mafia get the alcohol? Once prohibition really hits, the largest supply is going to be rum from Cuba and whiskey from Canada. Like I said, organized crime takes the trade over. I think Al Capone is probably the most recognizable, mafioso during Prohibition. He's definitely kind of the most iconic member of the mafia. He really relishes in his, in his leadership position within the mafia. He becomes this famous figure. Al Capone originally started out in New York, but ends up in the Five Points in New York, and ends up in Chicago, and will end up taking over the city of Chicago. He's going to make, for the time, just obscene amounts of money. And he takes over an event called the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. When he takes over, the guy that is really kind of in charge of Chicago is a guy by the name of Bugs Moran. And Capone really kind of knows he's not powerful enough. His gang's not powerful enough to take over from Bugs. And so what he does is he essentially calls up Bugs Moran, says, hey, look, man, you're going to win this thing. I'm going to sell you some alcohol, and I'm going to get out of your way, and offers to sell him, a warehouse full of alcohol for a very low price. And, when Bugs Moran's men show up, he Capone's not there. It looks like Capone's men aren't there. Capone's men dress up like cops and bust down the door to arrest Bugs Moran's men. Well, Bugs Moran's men, they're not going to fight the cops off. They don't have to. They've bought off the judges. They know if they get arrested, Bugs Moran controls the city. So they just essentially like, fine, arrest me, cop. I don't care. I'll be back out on the street in a couple of hours. And so Capone's men, who are dressed up like cops, essentially say, turn around, put your hands against the wall while we arrest you. Moran's men do that, and Capone's men open up fire, wiping out Bugs's men. And so Capone uses that to solidify power within Chicago. And once he does that, he takes over the whole kit and caboodle. Cops are on the payroll. He's buying off cops. He's paying off judges. He's paying off local citizens, right? He knows if he keeps the people of Chicago on his side, that he's going to be able to do essentially whatever he wants. And so if, you're just an average Joe working in Chicago, your meemaw gets sick and you don't have enough money to take her to a doctor, you can go to Al Capone's men. They'll give you money to pay for your meemaw's medical bills, or, you need your trash picked up. They got a guy for that. I mean, he really runs Chicago like it's one of the old political machines. He's constantly doing favors. He's spreading money around the community. And he pegs himself as this guy. He's like, I'm not the violent one. I'm just giving you guys the alcohol you want, spending money in your communities. I'm the guy that helped out your uncle or your cousin or whatever. And for the most part, the people buy it. Now, eventually he will be taken down. He's going to get caught for tax evasion, right? America can forgive a lot of things, right? You can get away with a lot of stuff in the United States. The one thing you can't get away with is tax evasion. And so he will end up in jail. He'll eventually be released from jail, but he'll die shortly afterwards of syphilis, which really painful way to go. It attacks your nervous system, drives you crazy. It's painful. And so he won't last the whole time. But he will be a pop culture phenomenon because he just embraces it. He's like, yeah, I'm the guy running Chicago, because he had everybody paid off. It worked. It will point out that we do have to, change the way our politicians and our, public officials, cops do business, and we will make those changes. Still not perfect system, but there are no such thing as perfect system. Like I said, eventually arrested for tax evasion. Okay, so prohibition seems like people don't like it. By the 1920s, you're getting to mid 1920s, only about 19% supported prohibition. The reality is people recognize it's causing more problems than it helped. It was empowering the mafia, and the average person said that's not worth it. Just to keep people from having a drink if they want to have a drink. And so, the police couldn't afford to enforce the law. It created more problems than it fixed. And by 1933, we'll see that the 18th Amendment will be repealed with the 21st Amendment. So the only amendment to be repealed in our history. Now, like I said, we're just going to cover these statistics real quick. You don't need to write these down, but just so you kind of understand, most people believe that during Prohibition, drinking increased, but that's not actually the case. We will see that even though we made drinking illegal, drunk and disorderly arrests went up, not down. They went up 41%. Drunk driving arrests went up 81%. And then this is kind of the big one here. People thought the temperance movement told us that the root of all evil was alcohol, that we would have a violence-free society if we just got rid of alcohol. But we outlaw alcohol and homicides, assaults, and batteries. So assault is the threat of violence. Battery is an actual violent act, rose 13%. So the experiment failed. Drinking doesn't necessarily make society any worse. A violent man's a violent man. He might be more inclined to violence when he's drunk, but he's still a violent man. And so the federal prison population rose by 366%. That's an astronomical number. So it's the end result of prohibition. Well, drinking in America actually did go down. There were fewer people drinking. The cost was just too high, and we're never going to get people to stop drinking completely. Right. Most of our casual social drinkers stopped drinking, but the hardcore drinkers just kept it up. All right. That's where we're going to finish our lecture for the day. I appreciate it, and I will see you again shortly.